Good morning, dear listener. You are going to listen this morning a discourse on the wasteland, a masterpiece of Thomas Stearns Eliot, born in Missouri, educated at Harvard, but moved on to England. S Eliot is perhaps the most titanic personality, poet, playwright, essayist, critic. Though he was not a professor of English in any university, a man who worked for the banks, produced some of the greatest poems of the 20th century. 20th century means, for us students of literature, an age of imagism and symbolism. Interestingly, Eliot, who started writing poetry, was a royalist in politics, an Anglo-Catholic in religion, and a classicist in literature. Though, of course, for the fantastic contribution he made in criticism, some people call him a rabble-rouser. Like a critic, he functioned almost with a scissor-like, sharpness, and cut out poets who were bad and reintroduced poets who were forgotten. John Donne Herbert, the metaphysicals, who were dismissed for their heterogeneous ideas being yoked together, were reborn after the criticism of T.S. Eliot. T.S. Eliot is also a master of poetic drama and produced such masterpieces as Cocktail Party and Murder in the Cathedral. His Ash Wednesday and 4 quartets have remained milestones in world poetry, not only in the English language, but in any other language. You would be flabbergasted to hear that the wasteland is available in Malayalam, Malay, Swahili, and such languages all over the world, not for its just British name, but for its quality and for capturing the predicament of man in the 20th century. What is the wasteland? Generally, the students ask me this question. The wasteland is the wasteland of 20th century. The wasteland is a poem totally concerned with the breakup of civilization. Not to be mistaken with the physical breakup of buildings falling down, skyscrapers crashing into the street, or government offices, but a spiritual breakup. The loss of meaning, loss of significance and purpose. I always say the wasteland deals with listlessness, restlessness, hopelessness in a country where nothing ever grows. The wasteland is nothing but a desert where man lives like an animal without a spiritual core. It's very interesting when it deals with the crack up of this civilization. He explains how modern man of the 20th century is going through a horrifying disorientation. Though it came before the Second World War, we could see the trauma and the suffering that was already seen in the First World War. But let me tell you, the wasteland is like Beethoven's symphony. The wasteland is like the great works of Renaissance, Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Mozart, one of the masterpieces of human invention. But it is not a simple poem. It is obscure. Some people said Eliot deliberately introduced obscurity so that nobody will understand him. But the truth is, obscurity is a process of enriching and enhancing the meaning of the poem that makes it timeless and universal in terms of relevance. It's a poem of 435 lines in 5 sections. The wasteland starts with the burial of the dead, fire sermon, death by water, and concludes with what the thunder said. I would like you listeners to note that this is one poem which has citations and quotations from more than 85 sources of the world. From Aeschylus and Bible to the Zoroastrians, the Indic Upanishads, the Bible, Shakespeare and whatnot. Some people looking at 85 sources of citations in a 435 line poem dismissed it as bad poetry, unfit for very obscure, unfit for reading. But the truth is, Eliot himself provides footnotes, and the footnotes are exhaustive and also exasperating. You need to know to understand the wasteland. But anyway, let's begin with understanding one, that here is a great soul of the 20th century with a human compassion and excellent art capturing the predicament of 20th century man. Who is this 20th century man? Albert Camus said 20th century is a man who does only 2 things, and they are fornication and reading newspapers. You ask Kafka, he will tell you it's a world that is grotesque, a world that is frightening, where the highest and the most celebrated part of human existence, called sexual relationship in man and woman, is reduced to a meaningless mechanical act. Man has no religion. He reads newspapers, and as his first poem explains, a man sitting in a treeless, soulless town under the sun says, I measure out my life with coffee spoons at 6 o'clock. In Preludes, he talks about 6 o'clock, the burnt out end of smoky days. He compares London city in the evening to a cigarette butt being burnt away. His guru was Ezra Pound. He taught Eliot how to write poetry, and the poem begins with a superscription, nam sibilum. And the line Il figlio m'abbro explains to you to the great craftsman. Who was that craftsman? Ezra Pound, the American poet who wrote a number of 2-line poems, the haiku poems. He taught him, and there are amazing images and symbols, and they have to be worked out. Therefore, the poem is not a poem really, it is like a mosaic. It's like a great painting of Picasso, and what you need is training before jumping into the obscure land of the wasteland. Let's begin and look at the poem. What does Eliot say? The wasteland attempts to project the modern man's illusion of being disillusioned. Man is disillusioned, listlessness, hopelessness. What should I do next? What is the meaning of all this? The poem is filled with references from history of the Western culture, or that it alludes to the great documents, literary and religious, that have shaped the culture, and that it makes use of some of the greatest myths, archetypes that have in the past been embodied, the salient features of the culture. Only those who know Miss Jessie Weston and Frazier's Golden Bough, these are the 2 basic books based on which he draws up the legends. In fact, I remember William Butler Yeats looking at the work of Eliot saying, Eliot is perhaps the greatest poet in English language or any other language that I know of. There is no more encomium required for Eliot because Eliot reaches the high point of poetry. Of course, may not be in the wasteland, maybe in Ashwin's day or four quarters. Anyway, a 430 line long poem with footnotes running to 13 pages. With the 430 line poem, but the footnotes are 13 pages of citations to culture from all over the world. He has used 6 languages and has derived material from 85 different sources. The wasteland illustrates thoughts what Eliot means when he asserts the whole body of poetry is one sentence. Look at this. The whole body of poetry is one sentence. The emphasis of romanticism on the individual poet's personality is passion and suffering of an artist, and the replacing it with a counter emphasis on the series of words committed to paper. Eliot's poems are like a web whose multiple threads, as in a carpet or a disarray or as in a mosaic, repeat or allude to tones and patterns already utilized in the collective endeavor for the reader if he insists upon clarifying each reference. Eliot has acknowledged this general indebtedness to both Sir James Frazer, who wrote an immense compendium of anthropological materials, The Golden Buff, and Miss Jessie Weston, who wrote the famous book on myths from ritual to romance, and includes the most crucial Grail legend, which is the heart of the poem. Behind this Christian legend, Miss Weston found an older pagan tale extant in many forms of a fisher king whose land and people, because of the deficiency of love, lose their fertility. They lose their fertility, and because of loss of fertility, they become barren and waste. Eliot also makes extensive use of scriptural writings, including the Bible, the Book of Common Prayer, the Hindu Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, and the Buddha's Fire Sermon. Eliot dedicated it naturally to Ezra Pound, the greater craftsman. Patni acknowledges his indebtedness is immense debt to the master. The first section, or the first movement in the wasteland, endeavors to describe and interpret the burial of the dead. Gods of Fertility, the subtitle is also derived from the Book of Common Prayers as used in the Church of England, the Anglican Church. The attractiveness of death, or the difficulty in rousing oneself from the death in life in which the people of the wasteland live. The theme of death is contrasted with the idea of rebirth. In fact, some people talk about life in death and death in life as the theme of the wasteland. Life at a higher, richer spirituality, elevating level is contrasted with the life of a lower, lovely experience to a degree in the city of London. The harbour of the wasteland of modern civilization. The opening lines of the poem lay stress on the influence of the seasons on the human life, and the section with the fertility myths. April is the cruelest month, breeding lilacs out of the dead and mixing memory and desire, stirring dull roots with spring rain. Obviously, it reminds us of Geoffrey Chaucer was April with his shower sweet pierceth the root and it's a celebration of the season. It's the opposite here. Cruelest month. So what do we call the wasteland? The wasteland is a heap of broken images. Chaos of life. Totally devoid of meaning. Shattered. It also suggests that human beings are subjected to changes of seasons. Both spring and winter act upon man, who is passive in the presence of nature. What remains in the wasteland is drought. There is only stony rubbish. The dry stone, no sound of water. It symbolizes complete degradation, hopelessness and listlessness. And therein comes the theme of sterility, which forms the best part of the first section. That is the burial of the dead. The second section, entitled The Game of Chess, is extremely interesting as it deals with the infertility, the lack of human or mythical meaning, and the central fertility symbol in the marriage of relation of men and women. Actually, Eliot compares the act of love ending with passionate sexual union becomes almost like playing a gramophone record. So every day you do it, and it starts like a gramophone record and ends like a gramophone record, having no meaning at all. No mystery, no pleasure, no bliss, no elevation, nothing happens. It just becomes a pure, meaningless, mechanical act in this wasteland. The chair she sat in, like a burnished throne, glowed on the marble. The opening scene is rich and lovely, full of colorful sensuousness, and Shakespeare's Cleopatra adds splendor to the scene. The vitality of contemporary women, their games with men, are nothing but an empty pastime or an open hostility, ending with that fellow, or two aspects of the terrible emotions of the barrenness and the sterility of the modern world, as though a window gave upon the silver scene. The change of Philomel by the Bourbon's king, so rudely forced, yet there the nightingale. In a world where the physical and the temporal is transcended by the spiritual and the eternal, her song, Philomel's song, gave meaning to her mortal pain. It's a world enclosed like a chessboard. Please remember, our life is like a chessboard, and men and women play on one side or the other. In fact, A.D. Hope later in Australia talks about a man and a woman playing a great tennis championship, where the championship and tennis become only substitute for the sexual desire to be expressed. But they all remain in the wasteland. Then there is the command, constant reminder, hurry up please, it's time. 20th century man has no time for anything. Hurry up please, it's time also has another meaning in a man going to a place to find sexual excitement. The chief symbols, the sexual violation, the fiery hair, the chess game, are all more or less constant with the Grail legend or other fertility myths. One may discover in Eliot's use of symbol a suggestion that people in the wasteland belong to a drama that they do not understand, where they are more like chessmen towards a destination they cannot see. So, life is a game of chess. Just as Buddha preaches the mind. Mind is on fire with the fire of passion, hatred, infatuation, with birth, old age, death, sorrow, lamentation, misery, grief, and despair. The only way to salvation is to become free from attachment. Look at this. This is what Arnold talks about disinterestedness, and the Hindus talk about Padmapatramivamasi. Man must live like a drop of water on a lotus leaf, both attached and also detached. This is the idea. But anyway, the fire described in the fire sermon, where the fire is the sterile burning of the lust. Quoted from St. Augustine. To Carthage then I came, where a cauldron of unholy lovers sang all about 9 years. The poem opens with an echo from Spenser's Prothalaamion. It's scenes of nymphs and lovers preparing, going for a wedding on the riverbank. Haunt the picture of autumn. Desolation describes the pollution of the stream by the modern, promiscuous lovers of the summer nights. The poem shows us a vision of a modern river. The season is still winter after the summer throngs have left the Thames. The next scene, the typist and the young clerk offer one more example of debased attitudes towards sexual relationships between men and women. Art of the irony of the whole section is that it is not fire of lust at all which is illustrated, but merely the complete indifference towards hostility, chastity. Chastity is the lost virtue. The machine images of the taxi and the gramophone record provide the appropriate setting for the desiccated quality of the characters involved in the scene. The fourth section, Death by Water, Sibyl Swords, I wish to die. It begins with the superscription also. It has an undercurrent throughout. The whole rhythm indeed, the quiet drifting pace of it suggests the pull towards the final forgetfulness. Yet the Phoenician sailors and the merchant are the symbols of initiates of mystery. Religions going back to the fertility cults with their ritual of consigning the effigy of God to sea and welcoming a return at the end of its journey. The whole idea is when fertility is lost, the fisher king has to make a sacrifice, and only then fertility can return. Death by water comes as a relief after the sterility of the typist girl and the Thames daughter episode, but the return of the mortality or the feeling of being mortal is not far in the section. This section introduces a variation on water symbolism. A current and the sea picked his bone in whisper. Phlebos is also linked with Dante's Ulysses, passing the stage of his life, age and youth, an image derived from Inferno of Dante. In the fifth section, what the thunder said, for Indians is the most significant section. The protagonist is on his way to the chapel perilous, and his journey is through a drought, the wasteland, more perching and agonizing than anything else felt before in the poem. Here, there is no water, but only rock. Rock, no water, and the soundy road. I would like you to read S Eliot's Choruses from the Rock to understand this poem better. There is not only no water, no caravan to bear birds, there is not even silence, my God. That is the wasteland. Even silence is not there. Men are tortured by day, only by sterile thunder. Rain is a nightmare, and there is a constriction of the cave. In the last passage of this section, the fisher king is found fishing with arid, dry plain behind him, and he asks, "At least set my lens in order." He starts in the country where nothing ever grows. Now he is asking for at least set my lands in order. This is the statement of realization. Again, the present Tiresias, neither a man nor woman, who is the narrator of the whole poem, is a prophet who wants crumbling of the crumbling world. The cock crew herald a damp, just imagining rain, but instead of experiencing the rain, we pass to the parable of thunder, an Indian myth from Upanishad. Datta, Dayadvam, Damyata. Comes like da, da, da. In the Vedic text known as the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, God Prajapati speaks in the voice of thunder, uttering of the Sanskrit word Datta Dayadvam Damyata, which means Datta, self-surrender, Damyata, give compassion, compassion, self-surrender, give compassion, sympathize, domination over self-control. The last passage of the poem, after a capitulating reference to the Fisher King, of the conscious incoherence of a desperate mind, but even in its description, it cannot refrain from repeating the thunder, 3 words, generation after generation, from uttering a formal ending of the Upanishad, with which all the Sanskrit, scriptures end. There is no Om there, please note. Shanti, 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 which really means peace that passeth understanding. That's exactly what is missing in the wasteland. I hope we will revisit the wasteland again in my next talk. Thank you.